never believed that a voice could change everything until I heard his. My name is Oliver, and 3 months ago I was just another aspiring vocalist trying to make it in the world. Then I received an invitation that would transform my entire existence. The Temple of Verbal Echoes, hidden deep in the mountains, where priests don't sing for congregations but for the gods themselves. Where voices are considered so powerful they must be separated by walls to prevent souls from binding too deeply. Where I would meet the man whose voice would become my salvation and my beautiful torment. The temple stood against the mountain like an ancient fortress of sound. Stone corridors echoed with distant chanting, and the air itself seemed to vibrate with sacred frequencies. I clutched my acceptance letter, still hardly believing I had been chosen. Out of thousands of applicants, they had selected me, Oliver, a young novice with what they called an exceptional voice, to join their sacred audio dramas. These weren't performances for human audiences but ritual enactments broadcast directly to the divine realm. Father Matthias, the temple's senior coordinator, greeted me in the entrance hall. He was a tall man with silver hair and eyes that seemed to look right through me. "Welcome to the Temple of Verbal Echoes," he said, his own voice carrying the trained resonance of decades of sacred speech. "You've been selected for a very special role. Your voice tests showed remarkable purity and emotional range. We believe you're perfect for the character of River in our upcoming ritual drama about love and sacrifice." As he led me through winding corridors lined with sound-dampening tapestries, he explained the temple's most sacred rule. "All voice work is performed in separate chambers," he said solemnly. "The power of direct vocal contact between performers can awaken soul bonds that transcend the physical realm. This happened before, and the results were both beautiful and devastating. The gods appreciate pure artistic expression, not the complications of mortal attachment." My chamber was small but acoustically perfect. Curved walls covered in soft fabric, a single microphone suspended from the ceiling, and a small window looking out onto the temple gardens. The script for our first session lay on the wooden stand, handwritten in elegant calligraphy. I would be playing River, a young temple servant who falls in love with a mysterious priest named Marcus. My scene partner would be someone called Massenet, known throughout the temple as the Velvet Voice. I had heard whispers about Massenet during my first week at the temple. He was legendary among the novices, a veteran performer who had been creating sacred audio dramas for over a decade. No one had seen him in person in years. He worked exclusively in the isolated chambers, emerging only for private consultations with the senior priests. Some said he was disfigured. Others claimed he was impossibly beautiful and had taken vows of visual isolation to prevent distraction from his art. All anyone knew for certain was that his voice was considered the most perfect instrument in the temple's history. The first time I heard Massenet's voice through my headphones, I forgot to breathe. It was deep, rich, textured like velvet over steel. When he spoke his first line as Marcus, something inside my chest resonated in response. River's scripted response died in my throat, replaced by something more honest, more raw. Instead of the written words, I found myself improvising, letting my voice respond to his with an intimacy that surprised even me. There was silence on the other end of the connection. Then Father Matthias's voice came through the overhead speaker. "You've broken from the script," he said, but his tone wasn't angry. It was wondering, "But that was perfect. Continue with that energy." The gods appreciate authentic emotion over rigid adherence to text. Massenet's voice returned, lower now, more intimate. "You have a gift, River," he said, using my character name but somehow making it sound personal. "Your voice carries truth that written words cannot capture." From that moment, I knew we were creating something beyond mere performance. After our first session, I found a small note slipped under my chamber door. The temple's internal message system was ancient but efficient, allowing performers to communicate without breaking the sacred isolation. The note was written in elegant script. "Your voice today was like discovering fire for the first time. You awakened something in Marcus that has been sleeping for years. I look forward to our next scene together." He had signed it simply M, but added a postscript. "The other novices call you Oliver, but I think of you as Voice. It suits you better." I spent the night crafting my response, writing and rewriting until I found words that felt true. Your voice is like forbidden incense, I wrote back. Sacred and intoxicating, making me want to breathe deeper even though I know it might consume me. River has never felt so alive as when responding to Marcus. I signed it V, accepting the name he had given me. Our scenes together became the highlight of my days at the temple. The script called for River and Marcus to develop a deep but impossible love, meeting only in dreams and sacred visions. As we performed these intimate scenes, the line between character and performer began to blur. Massenet's voice would drop to a whisper when speaking endearments, and I found myself responding with genuine emotion rather than theatrical technique. The other performers in the temple began to notice. After our third week of recording together, I overheard two senior priests discussing our work in the corridor. There's something different about their dynamic, one was saying. The resonance between their voices is creating frequencies we've never recorded before. It's as if they're harmonizing on a spiritual level. Our private correspondence grew more intimate with each exchange. Massenet wrote about his years at the temple, his dedication to the sacred arts, his loneliness in the isolated chambers. I shared my dreams, my fears about being worthy of this calling, my growing feelings for a man I had never seen. We developed our own language of devotion, calling each other Voice and Velvet, creating pet names that felt more real than our given identities. The breakthrough came during our recording of Scene 15, where River and Marcus were supposed to share a sacred dream, a ritual equivalent of physical intimacy. The script called for breathless whispers, spiritual union expressed through vocal harmony. As we performed the scene, I found myself genuinely affected by Massenet's whispered endearments, his voice painting pictures of impossible closeness. When River was supposed to express spiritual ecstasy, something real and unscripted escaped my throat. A soft sound, half gasp and half moan, that carried more genuine emotion than any written line could convey. The sound seemed to echo in my chamber long after I made it, and through my headphones I heard Massenet's breathing change, becoming ragged and real. For the first time in 10 years of performance, I heard him break character completely. His carefully controlled voice cracked, and he whispered, not as Marcus but as himself. My God, voice, what are you doing to me? The silence that followed stretched for long moments. Then Father Matthias's voice came through the speakers, but it was different now, awed rather than instructional. That will be all for today, he said quietly. Both of you, please report to your chambers for reflection and prayer. That night, Massenet's note was longer than usual, his elegant handwriting more hurried. You awakened a voice in me today that I thought was dead, he wrote. For years, I've been the perfect instrument, controlled and precise. But with you, I remember what it means to feel through song, to let emotion drive technique rather than suppress it. Your voice is sin, and I no longer want absolution. I replied with equal honesty. When I hear you speak, especially when you forget to be perfect, it's like hearing my own soul reflected back at me. River's love for Marcus stopped being performance weeks ago. Now I'm just trying to find the courage to let you know that Oliver's feelings for Massenet are becoming just as real. Father Matthias summoned us both for an unusual assignment. Instead of our regular scripted scene, he wanted us to perform an improvisation based on a simple premise. Two lovers saying goodbye, knowing they can never be together. No script, no predetermined dialogue, just the theme and our voices. As we began the scene, something shifted in the very air of the temple. Massenet's voice as Marcus was broken, desperate, carrying pain that felt too real for fiction. When he whispered, "Don't go," it wasn't Marcus begging River to stay. It was Massenet, speaking directly to me across the walls that separated us. My response came from the deepest part of my heart. If I could find a way to stay, if there were any possibility for us to be together without destroying everything you've built here, I would choose you over every sacred vow I've ever made. The improvisation continued for 20 minutes, two voices weaving a story of impossible love, of longing that transcended physical separation, of souls that recognized each other across any barrier. When we finally fell silent, I could hear my own heartbeat echoing in the chamber. Father Matthias's voice, when it finally came through the speakers, was thick with emotion. In 30 years of overseeing sacred performances, he said, I have never heard such authentic soul connection. That wasn't acting, gentlemen. That was two hearts speaking their truth through divine instruments. That night, Massenet's note contained a confession that changed everything. I need to see you, he wrote. I know it breaks every rule of the temple, every vow I've taken about artistic purity. But voice, I'm drowning in the sound of you, and I need to know if the man behind that incredible voice could care for someone like me. Meet me in the archive chamber tomorrow at midnight. If you don't come, I'll understand, and we'll return to being voices in the darkness. But if you do come, everything changes. I barely slept that night, my mind racing with possibilities and fears. What if seeing each other destroyed the magic we had created? What if the reality of Massenet couldn't live up to the man I had constructed from his voice and letters? What if I disappointed him? Just another young novice whose voice was more interesting than his face. But stronger than fear was longing. I needed to see the man whose voice had become the most important sound in my world. The archive chamber was deep beneath the main temple, reached through winding stone stairs lit by flickering candles. Ancient scrolls lined the walls, and the air smelled of parchment and cinnamon incense. I arrived first, my heart pounding so loudly I was sure it would echo off the stone walls. When I heard footsteps on the stairs, I turned toward the entrance, hardly breathing. The man who appeared in the doorway was nothing like what I had imagined. He wasn't the marble statue of masculine perfection I had somehow expected. Instead, he was human, beautifully and completely human. Medium height, with slightly disheveled dark hair that looked like he'd been running his fingers through it nervously. He wore simple temple robes, but underneath I could glimpse a tunic with faded lettering that read, I survived scene 27. When our eyes met, he smiled, and that smile transformed his entire face. His voice, when he spoke, was the same velvet instrument I had fallen in love with, but softer now, more uncertain. You're not what I expected, he said, stepping closer. You don't look like temptation. You look like someone who sorts ancient amphora by scent and gets excited about finding perfectly preserved manuscripts. I laughed despite my nervousness. You're not what I expected either, I replied. I thought you'd be more intimidating, more untouchably perfect. Instead, you look like someone who would leave notes in library books and know exactly which tea goes best with late-night reading. We stood there grinning at each other like idiots, the tension of months of separation dissolving into something warm and real. When he reached out to touch my face, his fingers tracing the line of my jaw, I leaned into the contact like a man dying of thirst finding water. Your voice is even more beautiful in person, he whispered, and I could feel his breath warm against my skin. All these months, I've been falling in love with a sound. Now I get to fall in love with the man who makes it. For the first time, we spoke to each other without microphones, without walls, without the sacred scripts that had brought us together. Our voices mingled in the small space, creating harmonies that no temple equipment could capture. When he told me his real name was Michael, it felt like receiving a secret more precious than any sacred text. We talked until dawn, sharing stories that our letters had only hinted at. Michael told me about his years at the temple, how he had retreated into voice work after a broken heart had left him believing that love was too dangerous for someone in his position. I told him about my dreams of using music to heal, about feeling like I had finally found my calling when I started working with him. As the first light began to filter through the small archive windows, Michael took my hands in his. I have a confession, he said. The final scene of River and Marcus, the one we're supposed to record next week. I've been rewriting it in my head. Instead of the tragic separation the script calls for, I keep imagining Marcus finding the courage to choose love over duty. I squeezed his hands tighter. What if we performed it both ways? I suggested. The official version for the temple records, and our version just for us? The final recording session for River and Marcus's story drew observers from throughout the temple. Word had spread about our unconventional dynamic, and senior priests gathered in the monitoring chamber to witness what they expected to be either artistic triumph or complete disaster. We performed the scripted ending first, Marcus choosing duty over love, River accepting the sacrifice with noble heartbreak. It was technically perfect, emotionally devastating, exactly what the sacred drama required. But when Father Matthias called cut, Michael's voice came through my headphones, quiet and meant only for me. "That's not how our story ends," he said. I smiled, even though he couldn't see me. "Then let's tell them our real ending." What followed wasn't in any script. Michael's voice as Marcus became something new, stronger and more certain than we had ever performed before. Even if there were no words written for us, he said, even if the gods themselves forbade it, I would still choose you, River. Your voice has become my prayer, your love my only sacred truth. My response came from the deepest part of my heart. I choose you too, Marcus. In this life and whatever comes after, I choose the man whose voice taught me that love isn't a distraction from the divine. It is the divine. The monitoring chamber had fallen completely silent. Through my headphones, I could hear Michael's real breathing, unscripted and intimate. When he whispered, "I love you," voice, I knew he was speaking to Oliver, not River. "I love you too, Velvet," I whispered back. And for the first time in months, we were just two men who had found each other against impossible odds. After the recording ended, we met in the corridor outside our chambers. For the first time, we walked together through the temple halls, no longer hiding our connection. Other novices stared, whispered, pointed at the legendary Massonet finally emerging from isolation. But I only had eyes for Michael, the man whose voice had guided me home to myself. Father Matthias found us in the temple gardens as the sun was setting. I expected censure, punishment for breaking the sacred protocols. Instead, he looked at us with something like wonder. In 30 years, he said, I have never heard the gods respond to a performance the way they responded to yours today. The resonance you two created, the authentic love in your voices, it opened channels of communication we haven't experienced in decades. You've proven that some rules exist not to prevent connection, but to make us recognize when connection is truly sacred. He paused, looking between us with approval that surprised us both. The temple would like to offer you both permanent positions, not as isolated voice actors, but as partners in developing a new form of sacred audio drama. Stories that celebrate love as divine rather than deny it. Michael's hand found mine, our fingers intertwining naturally. We accept, he said, his voice carrying the same certainty that had characterized his best performances. But we have one condition. No more walls between us. We work together or not at all. 6 months later, we were leading the temple's most successful program in its history. Our recordings of love stories, performed together in the same chamber, had attracted pilgrims from around the world. The gods, it seemed, appreciated authentic emotion over artificial separation. But more than professional success, we had found something neither of us had dared hope for. Love that had grown from voices in the darkness into something that could withstand the light of day. Every morning, I woke up next to the man whose voice had first called to my soul. Every night, we fell asleep to the sound of each other's breathing. No microphones needed. Michael still called me voice sometimes, usually when he wanted to make me blush. I still called him Velvet when I wanted to remind him of those first intoxicating days of letters and longing. But most of the time, we just used our real names, Michael and Oliver, two men who had found each other through walls and chosen to build a life without barriers. The temple had been right about one thing. Voices did have the power to bind souls. But they had been wrong about that being dangerous. Some bonds are worth the risk. Some loves are worth rewriting all the rules. Our latest project was an audio drama about two priests who dared to love each other openly, creating something beautiful enough to make the gods themselves weep with joy. It was our story, told through characters brave enough to claim their happiness. And every time we performed it, our voices rising together in perfect harmony, I remembered that first day when I heard Michael speak and forgot how to breathe. Now I knew how to breathe with him, how to let our voices weave together into something larger than either of us could create alone. Your voice is my home, he whispered to me one night as we lay together after a particularly moving recording session. And yours is my sanctuary, I whispered back, meaning every word. We had found each other through walls, but we had chosen to live without them. In a temple dedicated to voices, We had discovered that the most sacred sound of all was the harmony two hearts could create when they finally found the courage to sing together. This is our story, the story of how two voices became one song, how separation became connection, how rules became guidelines for finding what matters most. In the temple of verbal echoes, we learned that some echoes are worth creating. Some walls are worth breaking down, and some loves are worth singing about for the rest of your life. But our story didn't end with that first breakthrough. If anything, it was just the beginning of a journey that would challenge everything we thought we knew about love, faith, and the power of authentic connection. The months following our public revelation brought changes none of us had anticipated. Word of our unconventional approach to sacred audio drama spread beyond the temple walls, attracting attention from religious scholars, voice artists, and spiritual seekers from around the world. Some came as pilgrims, drawn by stories of divine approval for authentic love. Others came as skeptics, convinced that we had somehow corrupted ancient traditions. Michael and I found ourselves at the center of a theological revolution we had never intended to start. Our simple desire to love each other openly had apparently challenged centuries of doctrine about separation between the sacred and the personal. Letters arrived daily from other temples, some requesting guidance on adapting our methods, others condemning our influence on younger practitioners. The pressure was intense, but it also brought unexpected gifts. We received a letter from a young novice at a temple hundreds of miles away, a man named David who had been struggling with his own feelings for a fellow priest. "Your story gave me courage to speak my truth," he wrote. "We're not ready to be as open as you've been, but knowing that love can be sacred rather than sinful has changed everything for us." Similar letters arrived weekly, each one a reminder that our private love story had somehow become a beacon for others struggling to reconcile their hearts with their faith. The responsibility was overwhelming, but Michael handled it with the same grace he brought to his performances. "We're not trying to be leaders of a movement," he would tell the journalists and scholars who sought interviews. "We're just two men who found each other and decided that love was worth the risk of being vulnerable. If that helps other people find their own courage, then we're honored. But we're not prophets. We're just voice actors who got lucky enough to discover that authenticity is the most sacred art of all." Our work at the temple evolved as well. Father Matthias assigned us to train the next generation of voice performers, teaching them not just technical skills but the spiritual discipline of emotional honesty. It was challenging work, requiring us to articulate principles we had discovered intuitively through our own journey. The first lesson I taught my students was about the difference between performance and truth. When you step into that recording chamber, I would tell them you have two choices. You can hide behind technique, using your voice as a mask to protect yourself from genuine feeling. Or you can let your voice become a window, allowing your authentic self to shine through the character you're portraying. The first approach might make you technically proficient. The second approach might change your life. Michael's teaching style was different but complementary. Where I focused on emotional authenticity, he taught the practical disciplines needed to sustain that kind of vulnerability. Breath control that comes from centering yourself in truth rather than hiding in technique. Vocal exercises that strengthen not just your vocal cords but your ability to remain present with difficult emotions. Meditation practices that help you distinguish between your character's feelings and your own without losing connection to either. Our students were a mixed group, some barely out of adolescence, others mature practitioners seeking to deepen their craft. What united them was a hunger for something more real than the polished but emotionally distant performances that had become standard in many temples. One of our most promising students was a young man named Gabriel, whose voice carried a natural warmth that reminded me of my own early days at the temple. He had been assigned to work with another student, Thomas, on a series of scenes depicting spiritual mentorship between an older priest and a younger seeker. Both young men were technically skilled, but their performances felt safe, contained within acceptable boundaries. During one of our group sessions, I decided to challenge them. "I want you to perform the next scene," I said, "but this time I want you to let something real slip through. Don't manufacture false emotion, but if something authentic arises while you're working, don't push it away either." The scene they performed was one of spiritual counseling, Thomas's character seeking guidance from Gabriel's wise priest. But as they worked through the dialogue, something shifted. Thomas's questions became more personal, more vulnerable. Gabriel's responses grew warmer, more invested. By the end of the scene, both young men were breathing hard, and the rest of the class was sitting in stunned silence. "That was beautiful," Michael told them quietly, "but you both looked terrified. What happened in there?" Gabriel and Thomas exchanged glances, and I recognized the same mix of exhilaration and fear that Michael and I had experienced months earlier. "We stopped acting," Gabriel admitted. At some point, Thomas wasn't playing a seeker anymore. He was actually asking for help, for connection. And I was actually trying to give it to him. The confession opened a conversation that lasted for hours. Other students began sharing their own experiences of authentic moments breaking through their performances, their struggles with maintaining professional boundaries while pursuing emotional truth in their art. What emerged was a picture of young artists hungry for genuine connection but terrified of the vulnerability it required. This became the foundation of our advanced workshop, an intensive program for students ready to explore the intersection of personal authenticity and sacred performance. We called it Voices Without Walls, a title that made Father Matthias smile when we proposed it. The workshop attracted participants from temples across the region, creating our most diverse and challenging group yet. Some came seeking technical advancement. Others came running from personal conflicts in their home temples. A few came specifically because they had heard rumors about our unconventional approach to love and spirituality. Among this group was Marcus, not to be confused with the character Michael had played in our breakthrough performance. This Marcus was a senior priest from a conservative temple, a man in his 40s with a reputation for rigid adherence to traditional methods. His application letter had been formal, almost cold, stating simply that he wished to understand why so many younger priests were abandoning time-tested approaches in favor of what he called emotional indulgence. I was skeptical about accepting him, worried that his presence would inhibit the other participants. Michael advocated for inclusion, arguing that authentic dialogue required engaging with different perspectives. "He's not coming to attack us," Michael reasoned. "He's coming because something about what we're doing has challenged his assumptions. That suggests he's open to growth, even if he doesn't realize it yet." Marcus proved to be both challenge and gift. His technical skills were extraordinary, his voice control and dramatic interpretation refined by decades of practice. But his performances, while flawless, felt emotionally distant, as if he were demonstrating his craft rather than living through the material. During our third workshop session, I paired Marcus with Elena, a young performer known for her emotionally open approach to character work. The scene I assigned them was deceptively simple. Two friends saying goodbye before one embarks on a dangerous journey. Elena threw herself into the material with her characteristic intensity, her voice carrying genuine grief at the prospect of separation. Marcus delivered his lines with perfect technical precision, but something was missing. "Stop," I called after they had worked through the scene once. "Marcus, you're performing at Elena, not with her. She's offering you real emotion, real connection, and you're responding with technique. What are you afraid of?" The question hit harder than I had intended. Marcus's composed expression cracked slightly, revealing something vulnerable underneath. "In my temple," he said carefully, "we are taught that emotional involvement compromises artistic integrity. Personal feelings cloud judgment and lead to complications." "What kind of complications?" Michael asked gently. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, and I could see him weighing decades of training against whatever impulse had brought him to our workshop. "Attachments," he said finally. "Inappropriate relationships. Scandals that bring dishonor to the sacred work." I said, understanding flooding through me. "You're not afraid of bad art. You're afraid of good art because you've seen what happens when people connect authentically through their voices." The admission that followed transformed our workshop dynamic. Marcus told us about his own early experience with a performance partner, a young priest named Jonathan with whom he had developed an intense creative and personal connection. Their work together had been extraordinary, pushing both of them to new artistic heights. It had also led to a relationship that, when discovered by temple authorities, had resulted in Jonathan being expelled and Marcus being placed on permanent disciplinary probation. I learned to separate my personal feelings from my art, Marcus explained, his usual composure replaced by raw honesty. It was the only way to continue serving the temple. But listening to your recordings, watching your students work, I realized that what I gained in professional security, I lost in artistic truth. I've been performing with only half my voice for 15 years. The workshop became Marcus's journey back to wholeness, a process that was painful to witness but beautiful in its courage. Elena proved to be the perfect partner for his rediscovery, offering consistency and emotional generosity without pushing for more intimacy than he was ready to handle. Slowly, session by session, Marcus began allowing authentic feeling back into his performances. The breakthrough came during our final week, when I assigned the most challenging scene in our repertoire, a dialogue between two aspects of the same person, the public self and the hidden self, meeting in a dream state. Marcus chose to work alone, performing both voices, switching between the controlled priest he had become and the passionate young artist he had buried. As the scene progressed, the conversation became increasingly heated. The hidden self accused the public self of cowardice, of betraying their essential nature for the sake of security. The public self defended their choices, arguing that survival sometimes required sacrifice. But by the end of the scene, both voices were weeping, and Marcus himself was shaking with the force of emotions he had suppressed for decades. When he finished, the workshop room was completely silent. Marcus looked up at us with eyes that seemed years younger than they had been moments before. "I never grieved him," he said quietly. "Jonathan, I never let myself mourn what we lost, what I chose to give up. I just buried it and pretended it didn't matter." Michael moved to sit beside Marcus, offering the comfort of presence without presuming to give advice. The grieving process that followed was intense but necessary, and our workshop became an unexpected space of healing for all of us. Marcus's journey back to emotional authenticity inspired other participants to examine their own walls, their own compromises between safety and truth. By the end of the intensive, our group had become something like a family, bound together by shared vulnerability and mutual support. Marcus decided to request a transfer to our temple, ready to begin rebuilding his artistic practice on a foundation of emotional honesty. Elena chose to stay as well, accepting a position as assistant instructor in our program. But perhaps the most significant development was the relationship that blossomed between Gabriel and Thomas, the two young students whose breakthrough performance had helped launch our advanced workshop. Their connection had deepened throughout the program, evolving from artistic partnership to friendship to something more intimate and beautiful. They approached Michael and me near the end of the program, seeking guidance about navigating a relationship within the context of sacred voice work. "We've been where you are," Michael told them. "The intensity of creative partnership can amplify personal feelings in ways that are both wonderful and terrifying. The key is learning to distinguish between love that emerges from your work and love that can sustain itself outside the recording chamber." Our advice to them was the same wisdom we had learned through our own experience. Be honest about your feelings, communicate openly about boundaries and expectations, and remember that the healthiest relationships are those where each person can maintain their individual artistic integrity while also growing together as partners. Gabriel and Thomas took our guidance to heart, developing a relationship that became a model for other students in our program. They worked together professionally with skill and chemistry, but they also cultivated a personal connection that existed independently of their artistic collaboration. Watching them navigate the challenges we had faced gave me deep satisfaction, a sense that our story was helping create space for others to find their own authentic paths. As our program grew and evolved, Michael and I found ourselves traveling to other temples, sharing our methods and learning from different communities of voice artists. Each temple had its own traditions, its own interpretations of the balance between personal authenticity and sacred service. Some embraced our approach enthusiastically. Others were more cautious, concerned about disrupting established practices. At one temple in the northern mountains, we met Brother Samuel, an elderly priest who had been creating sacred audio dramas for over 40 years. He listened to our presentation with polite attention, then shared his own perspective. "You speak of authenticity as if it were a new discovery," he said with gentle humor. But every generation of artists thinks they are the first to choose truth over convention. What matters is not whether your approach is revolutionary, but whether it serves the greater good. His challenge pushed us to articulate more clearly what we meant by authentic performance. It wasn't simply about expressing personal feelings, we realized, but about finding the universal human experiences that lived within individual stories. When Michael and I first connected through our voices, we weren't just indulging in personal attraction. We were discovering something about the nature of love itself, something that could speak to others facing similar challenges. This understanding deepened our teaching and our own artistic practice. We began developing material specifically designed to explore universal themes through personal truth, creating scenes that allowed performers to access their own experiences while serving larger spiritual purposes. One of our most successful pieces was a dialogue between hope and despair, personified as lovers who have been separated by circumstances beyond their control. The scene required performers to access their own experiences of loss and longing while embodying abstract concepts in a way that would resonate with diverse audiences. When we performed this piece ourselves, it became a meditation on our own journey, the months of separation and uncertainty that had preceded our reunion. But when our students performed it, they brought their own stories, their own struggles with faith and love and identity. The result was a piece of sacred theater that spoke to the fundamental human experience of holding on to hope in the face of impossible odds. Our reputation continued to grow, bringing both opportunities and challenges. We were invited to participate in inter-temple festivals, to contribute to scholarly conferences about the evolution of sacred arts, to consult with communities struggling to balance tradition with contemporary needs. But fame also brought scrutiny. Conservative religious leaders began questioning our influence on younger practitioners, arguing that our emphasis on personal authenticity was leading to the breakdown of necessary spiritual disciplines. Some temples banned our recordings, claiming they promoted dangerous emotional indulgence. The criticism stung, particularly because it echoed some of our own fears about the responsibility that came with our public platform. Were we helping people find genuine spiritual truth, or were we simply encouraging them to mistake personal desire for divine calling? The answer came through our students, through the letters from practitioners around the world who had found courage to live more honestly because of our example. A young priest in the eastern provinces wrote to tell us how our workshop methods had helped him overcome a paralyzing fear of emotional expression that had been limiting his effectiveness as a spiritual counselor. A temple in the southern desert reported that adopting our approaches had led to the most powerful and moving sacred performances in their community's history. Most importantly, we heard from people like Jonathan, Marcus's lost love, who had spent 15 years believing that his capacity for authentic love was incompatible with spiritual service. Learning about our story and Marcus's journey back to wholeness had inspired him to return to religious life, this time in a community that celebrated rather than feared the full range of human experience. These responses reminded us that our work was never really about us, never about our personal love story. It was about creating space for others to discover their own authentic voices, their own paths to spiritual truth that didn't require them to sacrifice essential parts of themselves. As I write this, Michael and I have just completed our 5th year of working together, teaching together, building a life that honors both our individual gifts and our shared commitment to authentic spiritual expression. Our program has graduated over 100 students, many of whom have gone on to establish similar approaches in their own communities. The temple itself has been transformed, evolving from a place of rigid separation to a vibrant community where personal truth and sacred service enhance rather than compete with each other. Father Matthias, now in his 70s, often jokes that we turned his quiet mountain retreat into the most talked about religious institution in the region. But beyond the professional success, beyond the recognition and influence, what matters most is the simple daily reality of loving and being loved by someone who sees and celebrates all of who I am. Michael still makes my heart race when he calls me voice, still makes me feel like the most important person in the world when he asks for my thoughts on a new piece of material. We've learned that sustainable love requires the same disciplines as authentic art: daily practice, honest communication, willingness to be vulnerable even when it's uncomfortable, and commitment to growth even when change is scary. Some days are easier than others, but every day is an opportunity to choose each other again, to recommit to the truth that brought us together. Our latest project is perhaps our most ambitious yet, a full-length audio drama about the founding of the first temple that officially recognized romantic partnerships between its priests as not only acceptable but sacred. The story is fiction, but it draws from the real experiences of countless individuals who have struggled to reconcile their capacity for love with their calling to spiritual service. Michael plays the elder priest who must choose between maintaining traditional authority and supporting the younger generation's vision of inclusive spirituality. I play his former student, now a teacher himself, who risks everything to create space for authentic relationships within religious life. The parallels to our own story are obvious, but what excites us most is the opportunity to imagine a future where no one has to choose between love and service, where spiritual communities celebrate the full spectrum of human connection as expressions of divine creativity. As we work on this project, recording side by side in the chamber where we once performed separated by walls, I'm struck by how far we've traveled from those early days of secret notes and stolen glances. We've built something together that neither of us could have created alone, a life and a body of work that honors both individual authenticity and shared commitment. The gods, it turned out, were excellent listeners, and they had been waiting a very long time to hear a love song performed with such authentic devotion. But more than that, they had been waiting for us to discover that love itself is a form of prayer, that the courage to be vulnerable with another person is its own kind of sacred service. Our 6th year together brought unexpected challenges that would test everything we had built. It started with what seemed like a routine invitation to perform at the Grand Convergence, a once-in-a-decade gathering where the most prestigious temples from across the continent would showcase their finest work. Being selected was an honor that could establish our methods as legitimate contributions to sacred arts rather than mere innovations. But the invitation came with conditions that made my heart sink. The performance must adhere to traditional separation protocols, the letter stated. While we appreciate the artistic merit of your collaborative approach, the sacred nature of this gathering requires strict observance of established practices. All voice work must be performed in isolated chambers with no visual or physical contact between performers. Michael read the letter over my shoulder, his hand tightening on my shoulder as he processed the implications. They want us to go backward, he said quietly, to pretend that the connection we've built, the authenticity we've discovered, can be turned on and off for their comfort. The decision tortured us for weeks. Participating would give us a platform to reach the most influential religious leaders on the continent, potentially advancing acceptance of our methods beyond anything we had achieved so far. But it would also require us to deny the very principles that had made our work meaningful, to perform as if the walls between us were still necessary. Father Matthias offered wisdom that surprised us both. Perhaps, he suggested, the question isn't whether to compromise your principles, but whether you trust your connection deeply enough to withstand temporary separation. You've proven that your bond transcends physical proximity. Now you have the opportunity to demonstrate that truth on the largest possible stage. His perspective reframed the challenge entirely. We weren't being asked to abandon our relationship or deny our methods. We were being invited to show that authentic love could maintain its power even when forced to operate within restrictive conditions. The performance itself could become a statement about the resilience of genuine connection. We accepted the invitation, but on our own terms. We would perform separated by walls, as tradition demanded, but we would choose material that made our connection undeniable even within those constraints. The piece we selected was one of our most demanding, a dialogue between two souls recognizing each other across lifetimes, meeting in different incarnations but always finding their way back to the same essential love. The months of preparation were intense. We had grown accustomed to the subtle communication possible when working in the same space, the way Michael's breathing could guide my phrasing, how a shift in my posture could signal a change in emotional direction to him. Now we had to rediscover the pure vocal connection that had first brought us together, trusting our voices alone to carry the full weight of our artistic and personal partnership. The rehearsal process became a renewal of our relationship, stripping away the comfortable familiarity we had developed to rediscover the electric immediacy of our early collaborations. In some ways, it was like falling in love all over again, hearing Michael's voice with fresh ears, being surprised by inflections and choices that had become predictable in our daily work together. Gabriel and Thomas, now established instructors in their own right, helped us prepare by serving as outside observers, offering feedback on moments where our separation might be affecting the emotional truth of our performance. Their perspective was invaluable, helping us identify places where we were compensating for physical distance rather than embracing the unique intimacy possible through voice alone. The journey to the grand convergence took us through landscapes neither of us had seen before, mountain passes that opened onto vast valleys, ancient forests that seemed to whisper with their own sacred stories. We traveled with a small delegation from our temple, including Father Matthias and several of our most accomplished students, all of us nervous about representing our community on such a prestigious stage. The host temple was magnificent, carved into the living rock of a mountainside, its chambers and corridors designed to channel and amplify sound in ways that took my breath away. When we arrived for our first rehearsal in the performance space, I understood why the organizers were so insistent on traditional protocols. The acoustic design was based on separation, with isolated chambers positioned to create specific harmonic relationships that would be disrupted by performers working in proximity. But as Michael and I took our positions in our respective chambers, I felt a familiar thrill of anticipation. The space was designed to showcase the power of voices connecting across distance, and we had spent years perfecting exactly that kind of connection. Instead of fighting the architecture, we could use it to demonstrate what we had always known: that genuine intimacy transcends physical barriers. Our performance was scheduled for the final night of the convergence. After 3 days of traditional presentations that showcased the technical mastery and spiritual discipline of the continent's most respected voice artists, the work was impressive, demonstrating centuries of refined technique and deep cultural knowledge. But as I listened to performance after performance of flawless but emotionally distant sacred dramas, I found myself hungry for something more human, more vulnerable. The audience for our performance included not just the participating artists but religious leaders, scholars, and patrons whose support could transform the future of sacred voice work. As we prepared in our separate chambers, I could feel the weight of expectation, the awareness that we were representing not just our own temple but everyone who had ever struggled to reconcile authentic love with spiritual service. Michael's voice came through my headphones for our final sound check, warm and steady and immediately reassuring. "Ready, voice?" he asked, using the nickname that still made my heart skip after all these years. "Ready, Velvet," I replied, settling into the familiar rhythm of our partnership. The performance began with our characters as strangers, two voices calling out in cosmic darkness, searching for something they couldn't name. As the piece progressed, they began to recognize each other, to remember connections from previous lifetimes, loves that transcended individual incarnations. The material gave us permission to pour all of our own recognition, all of our own sense of inevitable connection into the characters' growing awareness of each other. But something extraordinary happened as we performed. The acoustic design of the ancient chamber, combined with the emotional intensity we brought to the material, created resonances and harmonics that neither of us had anticipated. Our voices began to blend and separate in ways that seemed to defy the physical laws of sound, creating the impression of multiple conversations happening simultaneously across time and space. The audience was completely silent, not even the sound of breathing audible in the vast performance hall. As our characters finally recognized each other fully, declaring their eternal love across all barriers of time and death, I felt our own connection reaching a new level of intensity. We weren't just performing love. We were demonstrating its reality, proving its power to overcome any obstacle. The final moment of the piece called for our characters to choose each other despite knowing they would be separated again, that their love would require them to find each other over and over across eternity. As Michael delivered his final line, his voice breaking with genuine emotion, I felt tears streaming down my face. "Even if we lose each other again," his character declared, "even if we have to search through 1,000 lifetimes, I will always choose you. I will always find my way back to you." My response came from the deepest truth I knew. "And I will always be listening for your voice," I replied, meaning every word. "In every life, in every incarnation, I will recognize the sound of my home." When we finished, The silence stretched so long I began to worry that we had somehow failed, that our emotional intensity had violated the sacred nature of the gathering. Then Father Matthias's voice came through our headphones, thick with emotion. "That was extraordinary," he said simply. "I think you should come out and see the audience's response." When we emerged from our chambers, the sight that greeted us was unlike anything I had ever experienced. The entire audience was on their feet, but they weren't applauding. They were simply standing in silent acknowledgement, many with tears visible on their faces. The reverent quiet felt more powerful than any applause could have been. Finally, the high priestess of the host temple stepped forward. "In 40 years of organizing these gatherings," she said, her voice carrying clearly through the acoustically perfect space, "I have never witnessed such perfect synthesis of technical mastery and spiritual truth. You have shown us that authentic love is not a distraction from the sacred, but perhaps the most direct path to it." What followed were 3 days of the most intense and meaningful conversations of our professional lives. Religious leaders who had been skeptical of our methods sought us out for private discussions about incorporating emotional authenticity into their own community's practices. Younger artists approached us with stories of their own struggles to balance personal truth with traditional expectations. But the conversation that affected me most deeply was with an elderly priest named Brother Augustine, who had been creating sacred audio dramas for over 50 years. He found us in the temple gardens on our final morning, walking slowly with the aid of a carved wooden staff. "I wanted to thank you," he said without preamble, "for reminding me why I began this work." He sat on a stone bench overlooking the valley below, gesturing for us to join him. 50 years ago, I fell in love with another young priest. We tried to maintain our relationship secretly, but the fear and guilt eventually destroyed both our love and our artistic partnership. His voice carried decades of regret as he continued. "I spent the rest of my career creating technically perfect but emotionally hollow performances, convincing myself that spiritual service required the sacrifice of personal happiness. Last night, listening to your voices connect across those chambers, I realized how much authentic spiritual expression I had lost when I chose safety over truth." Michael reached out to take the old priest's hand. "It's never too late to choose differently," he said gently. "Authenticity isn't about age or experience. It's about the courage to be vulnerable, which can happen at any moment." Brother Augustine smiled, his eyes bright with unshed tears. "Perhaps you're right. I may be too old to change my life completely, but I'm not too old to help the next generation avoid my mistakes. Would you consider accepting an invitation to establish a branch of your program at our temple? We have many young artists who could benefit from your approach." The invitation was the first of many that followed our performance at the Grand Convergence. Temples across the continent requested workshops, consultations, and training programs. What had begun as our personal journey toward authentic love had become a movement that was transforming how religious communities approached the relationship between spiritual service and human connection. But success brought new challenges. The demand for our time and expertise grew beyond what we could reasonably provide while maintaining the quality of work and depth of relationship that had made our programs effective. We were forced to make difficult decisions about which invitations to accept, which communities we could serve effectively without stretching ourselves too thin. The solution came from an unexpected source. Marcus, our former student who had completed his own journey back to emotional authenticity, approached us with a proposal. He and Jonathan, the partner he had reconnected with after 15 years of separation, wanted to establish a network of teachers trained in our methods. Instead of trying to serve every community directly, we could focus on training master teachers who could carry our approaches to their own regions. The idea excited us, but it also terrified us. Training other teachers meant sharing not just our techniques, but our most personal discoveries about love, vulnerability, and spiritual growth. It required us to articulate principles we had learned through lived experience, to create systematic approaches to what had often felt like intuitive breakthroughs. We spent months developing a comprehensive training program, working with Father Matthias and our most experienced students to create curricula that honored both the technical demands of sacred voice work and the emotional disciplines required for authentic spiritual expression. The first cohort of master teachers included artists from 12 different temples, each bringing their own cultural traditions and community needs to the program. The intensive training took place over 6 months, with participants spending extended periods at our temple learning not just our methods but experiencing the kind of supportive community that made authentic artistic expression possible. Many arrived as accomplished individual artists. They left as collaborative partners capable of creating the kind of creative and personal intimacy that their own students would need to develop. Gabriel and Thomas played crucial roles in the training program, sharing their own experience of navigating romantic partnership within the context of sacred voice work. Their relationship had matured beautifully over the years, becoming a model of how two people could maintain individual artistic integrity while also creating something together that neither could achieve alone. Watching them work with the master-teacher candidates, I was struck by how much they had learned about the practical aspects of love that Michael and I had discovered through trial and error. They could articulate the communication skills needed to distinguish between creative disagreements and personal conflicts, the boundary setting required to maintain individual identity within collaborative work, the spiritual disciplines that helped romantic partners avoid losing themselves in each other. Their teaching complemented our own perfectly. Where Michael and I shared the dramatic story of breakthrough and transformation, Gabriel and Thomas offered the quieter wisdom of sustainable daily practice. Together, we created a training experience that prepared master teachers not just for the exciting moments of artistic revelation, but for the ongoing work of building communities where authentic love could flourish. The graduation ceremony for our first cohort of master teachers was one of the most moving experiences of my life. 12 couples, some romantic partners and others creative collaborators, performed pieces they had developed during their training. Each performance reflected the unique cultural background and spiritual tradition of its creators, while also demonstrating the universal principles of authentic connection we had been teaching. One pair, brothers Samuel and David from a desert temple, had created a dialogue between two different aspects of divine love, exploring how the same essential force could express itself through both passionate romance and compassionate service. Another couple, priestesses Elena and Maria from a coastal community, had developed a piece about the courage required to love openly in communities that weren't ready to celebrate non-traditional relationships. But the performance that moved me most deeply came from Marcus and Jonathan, who had chosen to recreate the story of their own separation and reunification. Their voices carried 15 years of grief, forgiveness, and hard-won wisdom as they portrayed two lovers learning to trust each other again after betrayal and abandonment. As they performed the moment of choosing to try again despite their painful history, I felt Michael's hand find mine in the darkness. We had been fortunate, I realized, to discover our love at the beginning of our artistic partnership rather than having to rebuild it after years of separation. But watching Marcus and Jonathan prove that love could survive even the deepest wounds filled me with profound gratitude for all the different ways authentic connection could manifest. The success of our master-teacher program led to invitations that took us far beyond the religious communities where our work had originated. Secular voice artists, actors preparing for challenging roles, even business leaders seeking to improve their communication skills began requesting training in our methods. The principles we had discovered about authentic expression, it turned out, had applications that extended far beyond sacred audio drama. This expansion required us to adapt our teaching for audiences who didn't share our spiritual vocabulary or community structures. We learned to talk about emotional authenticity in terms of professional effectiveness, about vulnerability as a form of courage that enhanced rather than compromised authority, about the practical benefits of the deep listening skills we had developed through our religious practice. One of our most successful secular programs was designed for healthcare workers, particularly those dealing with patients facing terminal illnesses or traumatic injuries. The communication skills we taught, originally developed for connecting across recording chamber walls, proved remarkably effective for bridging the gaps between medical professionals and people in crisis. Dr. Catherine Walsh, a trauma surgeon who completed our program, wrote to tell us how the listening techniques she had learned had transformed her patient interactions. Learning to really hear not just the words but the emotions underneath has made me a better doctor, she explained. Patients feel more understood, more cared for, and that emotional support actually improves their physical healing outcomes. Similar feedback came from teachers, social workers, counselors, and other professionals whose work required them to connect authentically with people facing difficult circumstances. Our methods, developed from our personal love story, were helping people across multiple fields discover the power of genuine human connection. But perhaps the most meaningful expansion of our work came through the young people who sought us out, often against the wishes of their families or religious communities. Letters arrived regularly from teenagers and young adults who had heard our story and found hope for their own futures, particularly those struggling to reconcile their sexual or gender identity with their spiritual calling. One such letter came from Alex, a 17-year-old who dreamed of becoming a priest but feared that his attraction to other men would make him unwelcome in religious life. Your story showed me that maybe I don't have to choose between loving God and loving another person, he wrote. Would it be possible for me to visit your temple, to see for myself what a community looks like that celebrates all kinds of love? These requests led us to establish a summer program for young people exploring religious vocations, regardless of their sexual orientation or gender identity. Working with teenagers required different skills than training experienced adult artists, but it also brought unique rewards. Young people approaching our methods without years of conditioning about what sacred art should look like often achieved breakthroughs that surprised even us. Alex, when he finally did visit our temple, proved to have an extraordinary natural gift for the kind of emotionally authentic performance we taught. More importantly, he blossomed in an environment where his capacity for love was seen as an asset rather than a liability. By the end of his summer with us, he had decided to apply for formal religious training at our temple, becoming one of the first openly gay candidates to be accepted into our novice program. His courage inspired other young people, and soon we were receiving applications from across the continent for what became known as our Inclusive Vocations program. Some candidates were gay or lesbian, others were transgender or non-binary, and some were straight young people who simply wanted to serve in communities that celebrated rather than feared the full spectrum of human love. Working with these young people renewed my own sense of purpose and possibility. They reminded me that our story wasn't just about two men who had found love against the odds, but about the ongoing work of creating communities where everyone could bring their authentic selves to their spiritual service. One evening, as Michael and I were reviewing application essays for the next summer's program, I found myself overwhelmed by gratitude for the journey that had brought us to this moment. 7 years earlier, I had been a frightened young man hiding from his own feelings, convinced that love and spiritual service were incompatible. Now we were helping create a future where no one would have to make that terrible choice. Michael looked up from the essay he was reading, perhaps sensing my emotional state. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, reaching across our shared desk to touch my hand. "All of this," I said, gesturing at the applications spread between us, the letters from grateful students pinned to our bulletin board, the program materials for workshops scheduled months in advance. 7 years ago, we were just two people afraid to admit we were falling in love. Now look what we've built together. He smiled, the expression that still made my heart skip after all these years. We didn't build this alone, he reminded me. We built it with everyone who had the courage to trust us with their own stories, their own journeys toward authenticity. We just created the space. They did the real work. That perspective had become central to how we understood our role in the movement that had grown around our initial breakthrough. We weren't leaders in the traditional sense, imposing our vision on others. We were facilitators, creating conditions where authentic love could flourish and supporting others as they discovered their own paths to integration of personal truth and spiritual service. This understanding would be tested in our 8th year together, when we received the most challenging invitation of our career, a request to participate in the first international symposium on sacred arts and human sexuality, where religious leaders from multiple faith traditions would attempt to develop new theological frameworks for understanding the role of love and sexuality in spiritual life. The invitation came from Cardinal Maria Santos, a progressive Catholic leader who had been following our work for several years. "The Church is at a crossroads," she wrote in her letter of invitation. "We can continue to treat human sexuality as an obstacle to spiritual development, or we can begin to explore how the capacity for love might actually be central to the divine calling. Your witness to the compatibility of authentic love and sacred service could help us chart a new course." The symposium would bring together not just Christian leaders but representatives from Jewish, Islamic, Buddhist, Hindu, and indigenous spiritual traditions, along with scholars, artists, and activists working at the intersection of religion and LGBTQ+ rights. The goal was ambitious: to develop theological and practical frameworks that could help religious communities worldwide create more inclusive approaches to spiritual life. Michael and I spent weeks discussing whether to accept the invitation. The potential impact was enormous, but so were the risks. Participating would place us at the center of debates about sexuality and spirituality that had divided religious communities for centuries. We would inevitably become targets for conservative leaders who saw our very existence as a threat to traditional values. But ultimately, the decision came down to the same principle that had guided us from the beginning. We trusted that authentic love, honestly expressed, had the power to speak for itself. If our story could contribute to greater understanding and acceptance, we owed it to all the young people like Alex to take that risk. The symposium took place in a conference center in the Swiss Alps, chosen for its neutral location and stunning natural beauty. The 150 participants represented the most diverse gathering of religious voices I had ever witnessed, from Orthodox rabbis to Sufi mystics to Native American spiritual leaders. The opening ceremony alone was worth the journey, featuring prayers and blessings in dozens of languages and traditions. Our role was to share our personal story and then participate in panel discussions about practical approaches to creating inclusive religious communities. But we were also asked to provide artistic demonstrations of how sacred voice work could embody and express the kind of integrated spirituality the symposium was exploring. The performance we created for this context was perhaps the most challenging of our career. We wanted to honor the diverse faith traditions represented while also demonstrating the universal nature of authentic love. The piece we developed was a dialogue between two voices calling to each other across cultural and religious boundaries, gradually discovering that their different languages and practices were expressing the same essential longing for connection with the divine and each other. As we performed, switching between different musical modes and vocal styles drawn from various traditions, I felt the audience's attention in a way I had never experienced before. These weren't just passive listeners but active participants in an act of theological exploration, witnessing our demonstration of how love could be expressed as prayer. The discussions that followed our performance were intense and sometimes heated. Conservative participants challenged our interpretation of scriptural passages about marriage and sexuality. Progressive leaders pushed us to take stronger political stances on issues like ordination and marriage equality. Academic participants wanted us to articulate our theological framework more systematically. But the most meaningful conversations happened in smaller groups and informal settings, where individual participants shared their own struggles with reconciling faith and sexuality. A young imam told us about his secret relationship with another man and his terror of being discovered by his community. An elderly nun spoke about a romantic friendship from her youth that had shaped her understanding of divine love, but had to be hidden for 60 years. These private conversations reminded us why our public witness mattered. Every person who found courage to live more authentically created space for others to do the same. Every community that chose inclusion over exclusion made it easier for the next community to follow. The symposium concluded with a document that became known as the Alps Declaration, a statement of principles for inclusive spiritual communities that was eventually endorsed by religious leaders worldwide. Michael and I were honored to be among the signatories, but we were more excited by the practical commitments that emerged from the gathering. Over 50 religious communities pledged to implement concrete changes in their policies and practices, from revised language in ordination requirements to new programs for supporting LGBTQ+ members. A network was established to share resources and strategies, ensuring that the conversations begun at the symposium would continue long after the participants returned to their home communities. But perhaps the most significant outcome was the establishment of the International Institute for Inclusive Spiritual Arts, with headquarters near our own temple and a mandate to support artists and communities working at the intersection of authentic love and sacred service. Michael and I were invited to serve as founding directors, a role that would allow us to expand our work while maintaining the personal and artistic foundation that had made it possible. As we prepare to enter our 9th year together, both personally and professionally, I find myself continually amazed by the journey that began with two voices calling to each other across recording chamber walls. What started as a private love story has become a movement that touches lives across multiple continents and faith traditions. But at the heart of it all remains the simple daily reality of loving and being loved by someone who sees and celebrates all of who I am. Michael still makes me laugh with his terrible jokes about ancient manuscripts. I still make him blush when I call him velvet in public settings. We still disagree about the proper way to organize our shared studio space, and we still resolve those disagreements by creating beautiful music together. The Institute keeps us busier than ever, with programs running simultaneously in multiple countries and a constant stream of invitations to share our story and methods. We've learned to set boundaries, to protect the time and energy we need for our own relationship and artistic development. Success, we've discovered, can be as challenging to navigate as struggle. But we've also learned that our work is most effective when it emerges from our ongoing personal growth rather than becoming separated from it. The best teaching we do comes from sharing discoveries we're making about ourselves and each other. The most powerful performances arise from the continuing deepening of our own connection. Last month, we recorded a new piece based on our experiences at the International Symposium, a dialogue between two spiritual seekers from different traditions discovering that their paths to the divine converge in their capacity for authentic love. As we worked on the material, I was struck by how much we had both grown as artists and as human beings since those early days of secret notes and stolen meetings. Our voices blend now with an ease that comes from years of practice, but they also maintain the capacity to surprise each other, to discover new harmonies and emotional depths. The technical skills that once required conscious effort have become second nature, leaving us free to explore increasingly subtle aspects of spiritual and emotional truth. But beyond the artistic development, what moves me most is the continued evolution of our personal relationship. We know each other deeply now, with the kind of intimacy that comes from witnessing each other's struggles and triumphs, supporting each other through periods of doubt, and celebrating each other's achievements. Yet we also maintain the capacity for wonder that characterized our early connection. Michael can still say something that completely shifts my perspective on a piece we've performed dozens of times. I can still catch him looking at me with an expression of surprised affection, as if he's seeing me clearly for the first time. This combination of deep familiarity and ongoing discovery feels like the essence of what we've been teaching others about authentic love. It's not the temporary passion of early attraction, though that can be part of it. It's not the comfortable companionship of long partnership, though that has its place. It's the choice to remain curious about each other, to continue growing both individually and together, to treat your relationship as a spiritual practice worthy of the same dedication you bring to your service in the world. As I finish writing this extended version of our story, I'm sitting in the garden of our shared home, watching Michael work with a group of young artists who have come to study with us for the summer. His teaching style has evolved over the years, becoming more confident and systematic while retaining the intuitive empathy that makes him so effective with students facing their own struggles with authenticity. One of the students, a young woman named Sarah who reminds me of myself at that age, is working through her fear of emotional vulnerability in performance. I watch Michael guide her through an exercise we developed years ago, helping her distinguish between manufactured emotion and authentic feeling. His patience and insight remind me why I fell in love with him in the first place, and why I continue to choose him every day. The gods, it turned out, were excellent listeners, and they had been waiting a very long time to hear a love song performed with such authentic devotion. But more than that, they had been waiting for us to discover that love itself is a form of prayer, that the courage to be vulnerable with another person is its own kind of sacred service, and that the stories we create together can become sources of hope and guidance for others walking similar paths. Our journey from voices separated by walls to partners building a life together has taught us that authentic love requires the same qualities as authentic art: courage, practice, patience, and the willingness to remain open to growth and change. It's not always easy, but it's always worth it. Thank you for staying with us through this extended telling of our story. If you found hope or inspiration in our journey, please share your own experiences in the comments below. Every story of authentic love lived courageously makes it easier for the next person to find their own path to truth and connection. Remember that your voice matters, your love is valid, and somewhere out there, someone is listening for exactly the sound that only you can make. Until next time, keep singing your truth, and trust that the right ears will recognize the song of your authentic self.